and I'm a bass player, and I was born in Boston, Massachusetts in 1923. I started my music education in my dad's school called the Music Lovers School for Music and Drama. I learned to play the piano there. I learned harmony, solfeggio, and all the other basic reading and tone appreciation things in music. My dad had an orchestra that played classics and symphonic music, and they used to rehearse at our house during the middle of the week. And that's where I first heard the big bass violin being played. When the bass player drew that bow across the strings, that sent a thrill through me, which I'll never forget, and I knew I was hooked on the instrument. My dad was a little disappointed in me making that decision because he thought I had developed quite a skill on being a piano player. But I knew how I felt, and I just went ahead with it. I could not afford an instrument to play this, but solved that problem by joining the high school orchestra as a bassist, and the school taught you to play instruments, and that's where I got my start. From then on, it was practice, practice, practice. And I soon was able to join one of the local jazz bands led by Joe Nevels, a local band leader. I got that job because his bass player got drafted to the Army, and he let me use his bass as a favor. That was my basic training in bands, thanks to him. Pretty soon I started playing gigs in local nightclubs and partaking in Sunday jam sessions at the Savoy nightclub in Boston. I learned a lot of pointers from the local bass players in the area, and in 1944, a friend of my family introduced me to her young sister, and from that minute the minute I laid my eyes on her, I knew she was for me. A year later, we were married. Our first child, Linda, came along in February of 1945. And I knew then that I would have to come to New York to make a living playing music. I made my way to the 52nd Street jazz clubs, where I was able to work with guys like Stuff Smith, violinist Pete Brown, saxophone player, Billie Holiday, Charlie Shavers, trumpet, Errol Garner, piano, and many others. I also worked a lot of nightclubs like the Copacabana, the Zanzibar, the Onyx Club, the Three Deuces, Carnegie Hall, Cafe Society, and the Metropole, and a lot of others. The bebop era did not appeal. Around that time, the bebop area came in, and it really did not appeal to me musically. It featured lots of notes, but no identifiable melodies, which you could recognize. It showed off the great skills of the players, however. I was lucky to be hired by Duke Ellington because I patterned my playing after Jimmy Blanton, who was the greatest bass player of our time. And Skippy Williams, one of his saxophone players, asked Duke to give me a tryout with his band. And Duke agreed. However, I only stayed 4 months with the band because because we're newlywed, and he said, okay, I'll try him. I only stayed 4 months with the band because being a newlywed and starting a family, I knew I was needed at home and not on the road 9 months out of the year. My wife and kids were the most important thing to me in this world. I made the right choice because I had 3 wonderful children and a really beautiful marriage which lasted 60 years until my wife was taken from me by ovarian cancer. Pretty soon, the rock and roll recording area started to happen. This was the most productive and lucrative part of my New York career. I started with Atlantic Records, backing singers like Ruth Brown, the Platters, Ray Charles, Dinah Washington, Paul Anka, Neil Sedaka, the Oreos, Bobby Darin, the Tokens, Della Reese, the Cordettes, the Coasters, the Drifters, and almost every other artist that they had. Della Reese. Along the way, I was involved with many big bands, trios, quartets, duets, and every other kind of music. Some of the people that I worked with was Lucky Miller's big band, Boyd Rayburn's big band, Alan Freed's big band, rock and roll band, doing the holiday shows at the Paramount Theater for 3 or 4 years. Duke Ellington, Cab Calloway. I worked with the Apollo Theater House Band, Billy Taylor Trio, Pete Brown Quartet, Cecil Lloyd Duet. Cecil Lloyd was a wonderful piano player from the British West Indies, from Barbados. And Billy Rowland was Perry Como's piano accompanist for 25 years. I also worked with Red Allen Duo and Red Allen Septet and Johnny Hodges Octet and Stuff Smith's Quartet. In the 1960s, I approached several record companies to let me record some original compositions featuring the bass playing melodies with a choral group background. They all turned me down, telling me it's too far out. Well, I decided to have my own record date, and with the help of some of the musicians that worked with me doing the background records off all the companies, they helped me, and I wrote the charts and hired a studio, and we went in and cut 2 sides. The musicians did the date for $40 a piece, and the studio gave me a break on the price. We pulled it off for under $500. We recorded 2 sides, one called Take 5, and the other side called Trotman In. Ironically enough, Dave Brubeck came out with his Take 5 at the same time. He being such a big star at the time, his Take 5 knocked my Take 5 right out of the box. Brunswick Record put my record out, but did not promote it, so it really didn't get to be heard by many people. My wife bought 7 of the copies, and my daughter bought the other 3. It sold about 10 copies. I still am trying to get that record played to the public, and it is a classic, and I still have hopes to get it to the public. The marriage between the bass sound and the voices background is a fantastic new sound, and it will be accepted with amazement and as a rare musical treatment never ever tried or heard before. Some of the ladies that I've worked with at one time or another, or played with in concerts or something like that, I'll give you some examples of how they are. They are the most fascinating people I ever met in my life. Starting off with Duke Ellington, he was one of the most relaxed, patient men I ever knew. To work with him was a privilege. Cab Calloway, as long as you did the job, you had a job. He was a cool cucumber. Benny Goodman, you told the mark or else. Perfection was tantamount to him. Count Basie, cool and relaxed and a swinger. His life was as rhythmic as his music. These are some of the bass players that I was involved with and were very good friends of. The first one was Oscar Pettiford. He liked my playing, and he hired me to back him on bass when he adopted the cello as a lead instrument. I wrote a song called Oscalypso, which we recorded as a quartet. Guess who was on that record? Well, Duke Ellington was on piano, Billy Strayhorn was on celeste, and Joe Jones was on drums, and I was on bass. The record is a very good success. It's out and selling now. Slam Stewart also took me under his wing when he heard me in a Boston nightclub and showed me how to improve my technique in playing with the bow. Chubby Jackson, who played with bass with Charlie Barnett, took a liking to me, and he gave me many pointers on how to improve my tone and bring my sound out on the bass. These bass players were the cream of the crop. And I was honored and quite thrilled to have their attention and their help. About the different styles of music. We'll start off with jazz. Jazz was by far the onset of modern music history of our times. It was the most exciting and inventive sound that thrilled the world. Dixieland was a part and party of jazz, and the contribution to American music is a treasure to music lovers all over the world. And next we had swing. Swing was a treatment of music which lent itself to Saturday night dances, proms, and young people adopted swing in hordes. Bebop was an inventive style by Dizzy Gillespie, Charlie Parker, Miles Davis, and others who adopted that style of playing. It was highly technical, but not very melodic. You would have to be a musician to understand the riffs and the dissonances used by the player. It was commendable in its own way, however. It was called bebop because every phrase that they played in their solos ended with bebop, bebop. Very. Now go to side 2 for the rest of my little talk here.